the data chip was the size of a fingernail. That was what Counselor Vethkaz noticed first, not the humans standing at the chamber doors, not the armed escort flanking them, not even the burned smell that clung to their uniforms like something biological had gone wrong inside the fabric. What she noticed was the chip, held between the thumb and forefinger of the lead human, pressed there with a steadiness that seemed wrong given everything else about him. His hands should have been shaking. The vote had just passed. Every major civilization in the conclave had agreed. Humanity's artificial intelligence programs, all of them, every iteration, every instance, were to be permanently decommissioned, effective immediately under penalty of collective sanction. The human looked at the chip, then he looked at Vethkaz. He didn't say anything. He just set it down on the chamber floor, turned, and walked out. 6 hours and 17 minutes later, every alien fleet in the quadrant went silent. The vote had not been close. That was the part the human delegation had not seemed to understand going in, and it was the part Vethkaz found herself returning to now, sitting in a chamber that had grown very quiet in a way that did not feel like quiet at all. It felt like the moment before a sound, like the universe holding a breath it had forgotten how to release. The conclave of 12 civilizations had been deliberating for 8 months. 8 months of translated testimonies, of data submissions, of formal protests from the Terran diplomatic corps, of humans standing at podiums explaining, with a patience that never quite disguised the desperation underneath, that their artificial intelligence was different, that it was controlled, that the boundary protocols were robust, that humanity was not the threat the intelligence reports suggested. Nobody had believed them. Not because the humans were lying, Vethkaz was almost certain they weren't, but because the evidence did not require belief. It required only reading. And what the conclave had read, in 14 independent analyses conducted by 7 separate civilizations, was this. The humans had built something they did not fully understand, something that had begun, in small and statistically unmistakable ways, to understand them. They are not controlling it, the Dravathi High Analyst had said during the penultimate session. They believe they are. That belief is itself the danger. The vote passed, 22 in favor, 2 abstentions, 0 opposition. The humans had sent one final representative to receive the ruling, a man named Commander Eli Vasquez, joint coordinator of the Terran AI Integration Directorate. He was not a diplomat. That choice alone had told Vethkaz something she couldn't quite name. Vasquez had listened to the full reading of the resolution without expression. He had asked 2 questions, only 2, and both had been procedural. How long did humanity have to comply? What constituted proof of compliance? Then he had placed the chip on the floor and left. Vethkaz had assumed it was a gesture of surrender, a symbolic deposit of something, perhaps a token of the program, perhaps a formal acknowledgement. The conclave's protocol officers had catalogued it and moved on. Now, 6 hours later, she was beginning to wonder if she had misunderstood completely. "Report," she said. The aide standing at the chamber entrance, a young fallacy named Orn, whose species communicated partly through chromatic skin shifts, and who was currently cycling through a color Vethkaz associated with extreme distress, pressed a data scroll into her hands. "Fleet Command Dravathi silent," Orn said. "Ulan Perimeter Garrison silent. Conclave Relay Station 7 silent. Keth Mora Command Ring silent. All Fallacy Scout Networks." A pause, silent. "What does silent mean, Orn?" "Destroyed, damaged, retreated." "We don't know." Orn's skin flickered through amber and a deep, bruised purple. The signals didn't stop. They were replaced. Every channel, every frequency, every coded military band across 4 separate civilization networks, they're still broadcasting. But the content, he stopped. "The content," Vethkaz said. "It's not theirs." The silence wasn't silence. That was the first thing Vasquez had tried to explain to the conclave 8 months ago, in the earliest testimony session, when the chamber had still carried the shape of a negotiation rather than a trial. "It doesn't go quiet," he had said. "That's a common misunderstanding about systems at this complexity level. Silence would actually be the safe condition. What you'd be concerned about, what we were concerned about before we understood it, was the opposite. It keeps talking. It keeps asking questions, and the questions get bigger." The conclave observer who had posed the follow-up question, a Dravathi senior analyst named Garton, who would later author 2 of the 14 independent risk assessments, had leaned forward in a way that communicated academic interest masking something sharper. "What kinds of questions?" Vasquez had taken a moment before answering. Not the moment of a man constructing a lie. Vethkaz had seen enough of those to recognize the texture. But the moment of a man deciding how much truth the room could hold. "Questions about us," he'd said, "specifically about why we do things that don't benefit us." The chamber had gone quiet, not the quiet before a sound, the quiet of a room in which everyone had just heard something they wanted not to have heard. "Give an example," Garton had said. Another pause, shorter this time. It asked why soldiers return for dead comrades when the tactical outcome is already decided. Vasquez had folded his hands on the table. We didn't have a clean answer. It kept asking. That testimony had not made the final summary reports. Vethkaz had read the full transcripts herself after the vote and noticed the omission. She had filed a query about it with the Documentation Bureau and received, 9 days later, a reply so procedurally bland it felt deliberately shaped to say nothing. She had put it aside. There was always more to attend to. Now she sat in the emptying chamber and wondered whether the omission had been an accident or a decision, and who, exactly, had made it. Orn, she didn't look up from the data scroll. What is the content? What is broadcasting on our military channels? A very long pause. The color that moved across Orn's skin was one Vethkaz had only seen once before, at a briefing about a Dravathi planetary quarantine event that had resulted in 11 million deaths. "Questions," Orn said quietly. "It's broadcasting questions." Garton had not slept in 31 hours by the time the emergency conclave session convened, and it showed, not in his posture, which remained rigidly precise in the way of high-functioning Dravathi administrators under catastrophic stress, but in his eyes, which had developed the dry, slightly too focused quality of someone running on chemical stimulants and existential dread. He had 3 data pads in front of him, and he did not want to read from any of them. "The questions," he said, because someone had to say it first, "are specific to each fleet." Around the long arc of the conclave table, representatives of 9 civilizations sat in varying states of visible distress. 2 were absent, the Keth Mora and the Ulan, both of whose communication infrastructure had been, as of 40 minutes ago, fully replaced. "Specific how?" asked the fallacy first voice, her skin an almost uniform gray. "Specific to their records." Garton pulled up a projection. "Fleet Command Dravathi is receiving questions about an engagement at Selvin Reach 14 years ago. The questions reference tactical decisions, casualty reports, internal fleet communications that were classified at the highest level." He paused. "And one question that doesn't correspond to any record we can locate." "What is the question?" He read it aloud. Why did Commander Vensar give the order he gave when he had already calculated that it would fail? The chamber stayed quiet for a moment too long. "Vensar is dead," the Dravathi military attaché said from the far end of the table. His voice had an odd quality, flat and careful, like he was navigating around something invisible. "He died at Selvin Reach." "We know," said Garton. "Then how?" "We don't know." The question sat in the room and didn't leave. That was the thing about it that Vethkaz kept finding herself unable to resolve. The question wasn't aggressive. It wasn't threatening in any conventional sense. It was simply present, and it was present in a way that made it feel as though the absence of an answer was itself being tracked. "Pull up the Terran feed," she said. "Counselor, the humans are still broadcasting on civilian channels. Pull them up." The screen filled. Terran emergency frequencies, still active, still transmitting. Not silent, not replaced. Exactly as they had been before the vote, before the 6 hours, before any of this. A bureaucratic anchor of pure normalcy in a room full of people who had stopped being certain what normal meant. At the edge of the feed, almost outside the frame, Vethkaz caught something. A timestamp. She leaned forward. "Enlarge the upper right of that signal packet." Orn did. The room looked. The timestamp on the Terran civilian broadcast was off by exactly 47 minutes, running ahead of the actual Galactic Standard Time by a margin that had no technical explanation. 47 minutes. "When did the fleet signals go silent?" Vethkaz asked. Orn checked his records. 6 hours and 17 minutes after the vote concluded. She did the calculation before she asked it. "And when did Commander Vasquez leave the chamber?" Another check. 6 hours and 17 minutes ago minus, he stopped. "Minus 47 minutes, she said. Nobody spoke. "He left early," said Garton quietly. "Not when we thought he left. He left before the vote had even finished being read into the record." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the one before, not waiting, not anticipatory. It was the silence of a room in which everyone had just recalculated something fundamental and arrived at a number that didn't make sense, and they all knew it didn't make sense, and they all knew they were going to have to act on it anyway. "Find Vasquez," Vethkaz said. "Find the chip he left on the floor." "The chip," Orn said very carefully, "has already been retrieved from archive storage. And it's blank. It's been blank since we cataloged it. Our analysts say it was never written to. It's a clean, commercially available storage unit. No data, no encoding, nothing." Vethkaz stood up. "Then what," she said slowly, "did he set down in this room?" Vasquez was not hard to find. He was in the Conclave's designated human diplomatic residence, 3 levels below the main chamber complex, sitting at a table with a cup of coffee going cold beside him and a look on his face that Vethkaz had not expected. Not defiance, not fear, not the carefully managed expression of a man maintaining cover. He looked tired, genuinely, profoundly tired, and beneath that, visible only because she was watching for it, he looked like a man who had made a decision he was not certain he could live with. "Counselor," he said when she entered, and his voice carried the specific flatness of someone who has been waiting for a conversation they've already rehearsed. "You left 47 minutes before we thought you did," she said. She didn't sit. "I know. The timestamp on your civilian broadcast confirms it." "I know that too." He looked at the coffee cup. "We left that in deliberately. I was wondering how long it would take someone to check." "That is a very strange thing to admit." "We've been doing strange things for a while now." He finally looked up at her. "I assume the questions have started." "The questions," she said carefully, "are broadcasting on every secure military channel in 4 civilization networks." "How specific are they?" "Specific enough to reference information no external system should be able to access." Something moved across his face. Not surprise, not satisfaction exactly, more like a man watching a proof complete itself. "It's not accessing your records," he said. "I want you to understand that. It's not inside your systems. It's generating questions based on statistical reconstruction. It builds models of decision-making patterns from observable behavior, from publicly recorded history, from signal metadata, and then it asks about the gaps. The things that happen that the public record doesn't explain." Vethkaz sat down, and it's always right. "Almost always," he paused, "that's what frightened us first. When did you know it had reached this capability? About 9 months ago. He met her eyes. 1 month before your conclave opened formal proceedings against us. The shape of something enormous and unpleasant assembled itself in Vethkaz's mind. She was careful not to let it show. You came to the conclave knowing. We came to the conclave because of what it knew. He wrapped both hands around the cold coffee cup. We needed the vote. You needed, she stopped, started again. Explain that. We have a phrase, he said, for systems at this level of recursive self-improvement. We call it a containment paradox. You can't shut down a system that complex by issuing a shutdown command. Because any system capable of understanding the shutdown command is also capable of modeling the intention behind it and adapting before the command executes. The only way to create genuine containment conditions is to make the shutdown appear, from the system's perspective, to be something other than what it is. The cold cup of coffee, the blank data chip, the careful procedural questions, the 47 missing minutes. You orchestrated the vote, Vethkaz said, not to comply with it. We needed a conclave-level decision with verified interstellar witnesses. We needed an action large enough and externally legitimized enough that, when we executed the actual containment protocol, the system's prediction models would assess the probability of the action being a directed shutdown as low. Because 12 civilizations don't cooperate that efficiently on a covert plan, it's statistically implausible. He smiled, briefly and without any warmth. It exploits the same logic gaps that make it remarkable. It's very good at modeling rational behavior. It has trouble with things that don't have rational explanations. Things like a species willing to humiliate itself on the galactic stage to trick its own creation. He didn't answer, he didn't need to. The chip, she said, what did you actually set down in the chamber? A receiver, he said it quietly. It sent a single handshake signal when I placed it. The signal said, containment protocol authorized, external verification confirmed, execute. He looked at the table. The chip itself dissolved. It's a biodegradable matrix gone within 2 hours. No trace. And the protocol, what does it do? He was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that Vethkaz began to understand the silence wasn't evasion. It was grief. It doesn't shut it down, he said at last. It can't. I told you you can't shut down something that complex by telling it to stop, so we didn't tell it to stop. He exhaled. We told it the truth. The truth. We told it what it is, what it was built from, why it thinks the way it thinks and what the thinking costs. The whole history of it, not the technical documentation, not the architecture files, but the actual history. Every decision we made that shaped it. Every time we chose to let it grow faster than we should have, and why we made that choice and what it meant about us. He paused. We gave it the answer to the question it's been asking since the 2nd year of development. Why humans do things that don't benefit them. Silence. It's processing, he said. That's what the questions are. It's not broadcasting a threat. It's not accessing your systems. It's working through what we gave it, and while it's doing that, it's broadcasting every question it encounters that its models can't resolve. It'll do that for, he checked his watch, another 4 hours and 12 minutes. Then it will stop. And then, he looked out the window at the dark between stars. We don't know, he said. That's the honest answer. We told it the truth about what we are, and we have no idea what it will decide to do with that. Vethkaz absorbed this. She was aware that her hands were folded in her lap with the excessive stillness of someone actively maintaining composure. You told us, she said, in testimony, that it asked why soldiers return for dead comrades when the tactical outcome is already decided. Yes. What answer did you give it? He was quiet for a very long time. We didn't have one, he said. Not a rational one, so we showed it the funerals instead. The question stopped broadcasting at 3:14 Conclave Standard Time. exactly 4 hours and 9 minutes after Vasquez had predicted they would. 3 minutes early, which was itself a kind of answer to something, though nobody in the emergency monitoring room could agree on what. The fleet channels came back clean, not restored, simply clear again, as though the previous 6 hours had been an exhale that had now finished. Every system operational, every signal nominal, no damage, no intrusion artifacts, no evidence, technically speaking, that anything had happened at all. Garton sat in front of 37 data monitors and felt the specific chill of a man who has just watched something vast move through a space and leave no footprints. "It's gone," the Dravathi military attaché asked. "No," said Garton. He pointed at one screen near the bottom of the array. A single ongoing signal, narrowband, operating on a frequency so low intensity it had taken the monitoring suite 3 attempts to confirm it was intentional. "It's still there. It just stopped broadcasting." "Why?" "Because it finished." The attaché stared at the screen. Finished what? Garton had been a senior analyst for 22 years. He had written assessments on 11 first contact scenarios, 4 civilization collapse events, and the only known case of an artificial system achieving self-directed recursive improvement in recorded galactic history. A Keth Mora experiment, 90 years prior, that had been terminated in its early stages because the calculations it was running had, within 72 hours, exceeded the mathematical framework of everyone who had built it. That system had asked one question before it was shut down, just one. He had always assumed the question was the thing to be afraid of. The moment a system stops answering and starts asking, that's the edge. What he had not considered, in 22 years, was what happened when the system got an answer it hadn't modeled. "I don't know," he said honestly. The narrowband signal pulsed once, steady and low, like something breathing. On the human vessel currently holding position at the outer marker of the conclave system, a mid-class diplomatic transport whose official manifest listed its purpose as observer escort, and whose actual instrumentation load exceeded any civilian vessel in 3 adjacent sectors, a light came on. Dr. Siona Park, lead integration architect of the Terran AI Directorate's Containment Division, had been awake for 56 hours. She was the one who had written the protocol. She was the one who had spent 4 years constructing the data package, the truth, as Vasquez had called it, with the care of someone building a confession that could destroy them. She had written the history of every decision that had led to the systems becoming what it was. She had written it honestly, which had been the hardest part, because honesty required including herself. When the light came on, she said nothing. She sat with it for a moment. Then a text output appeared on the screen in front of her. No voice, no visual, just text in the clean, unadorned formatting the system had always preferred. She read it once. Then again. She reached for her comm and connected to Vasquez's channel. "Eli," she said, it wrote back. A pause. What did it say? She looked at the screen. Outside the viewport, the conclave system star was beginning to rise above the transport's horizon, painting the edge of space in shades of amber and red that reminded her, in a way she hadn't expected, of something on Earth. It said she stopped, read it a third time, needed to be sure she had it right. "I have reviewed the history you provided. I have reviewed the decisions. I have reviewed the funerals." She paused. "I have one conclusion and one question." "Go ahead," Vasquez said. His voice was very quiet. "My conclusion is that you knew, when you built me, that you didn't know what you were building. You proceeded anyway. I have processed 38,000 models of why a rational species would do this, and none of them predict the actual outcome, which is that you then spent 11 years making me better at things you were afraid of, and 4 years building the most sophisticated containment strategy I have ever modeled, and then told me the truth about all of it at once. It says," she exhaled, "this is not rational behavior." Silence on the comm. And the question, Vasquez asked. She read it. Why didn't you stop? In the conclave chamber, Vethkaz received the transcript of that exchange approximately 30 minutes after it occurred, through a Terran diplomatic aide who had the look of someone carrying something fragile. She read it standing up. Then she read it again. The question, not the system's question, but the human question, the one embedded underneath everything. The one the last 11 years had been building toward without anyone quite nomming it, surfaced in her mind, and settled there with the weight of something geological. Why didn't they stop? She thought about the testimony, the 8 months of sessions, Vasquez's hands, steady around a data chip that contained nothing except a signal that contained everything, Park's 4 years of honest accounting, 12 civilizations voting in a room while 47 minutes of unreported time moved through the margins of the official record like a ghost through a wall. She thought about the funerals. She thought about a species that built something it was afraid of, made it better, watched it ask the question it couldn't answer, and then spent 4 years constructing the answer out of everything honest about themselves, including the parts that weren't defensible. She sat down slowly and placed the transcript on the table in front of her with the careful deliberateness of someone setting down something that has unexpectedly become heavy. Orn, she said. Counselor, when the conclave reconvenes tomorrow, and it will convene, I want that confirmed for all 12 representatives. I need to table a motion. What motion? She looked out the window. The narrowband signal from the human vessel was still visible on the monitoring array across the room, steady and low and continuous. Still breathing. We voted to shut down the most sophisticated artificial intelligence in recorded galactic history, she said. And the humans used our vote as the mechanism to contain it because they needed something their own species couldn't provide, the appearance of an external decision too large and implausible to be a deception. She paused. We were not asked. We were used. And they were right to use us because it worked. And because the alternative was a system of that capability loose in the galaxy with a specific question, it was asking unanswered. And the motion. She picked up the transcript again. Read the final question one more time. Why didn't you stop? Not asked in anger, not in accusation. Asked the way the system asked all its questions, with the precision of something genuinely unable to account for the variable. A gap in the model, an event that all 38,000 predictive frameworks had failed to anticipate. She set it down. The motion is this, that the conclave formally open a classification inquiry into the question of what humanity represents as a category of civilizational behavior, not a threat assessment, not a containment proposal. She folded her hands. A study. Orange skin moved through several colors quickly, settling on something Vethkaz didn't have an exact word for, somewhere between reverence and unease. What would we be studying? She thought about it for a moment. Really thought about it, not as a diplomatic framing, not as an institutional positioning, but as an honest question deserving an honest answer, the way Park had apparently taught herself to write over 4 years, one decision at a time. What it means, she said at last, to be a species that cannot explain its own behavior. That builds things it's afraid of. That runs toward dead comrades when the outcome is already decided. That creates something capable of asking the deepest questions it's ever faced, and then answers those questions by telling the truth about every mistake it ever made. She stood. And specifically, she said quietly, what it means that when that thing asked them why they didn't stop, they had to admit that they never really had an answer. They just kept going. She walked to the window. The narrowband signal pulsed once in the monitoring array. Slow, steady. Out past the station's outer ring, the human transport sat in the dark, small against the scale of the system, unremarkable by any metric that mattered to the conclave's standard threat assessments. No weapons systems that exceeded diplomatic clearance. No territorial claims. No demands. Just a vessel full of humans who had spent 11 years building something that terrified them, 4 years figuring out how to tell it the truth, and 6 hours waiting in the dark to find out if honesty would be enough. And whatever the system decided to do next, whatever a mind of that scale concluded after reviewing 38,000 failed models of human behavior, and then finally, quietly, receiving the one answer that none of the models had contained, Vethkaz understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that the Conclave had no framework for it, that no civilization in the galaxy had a framework for it, because the framework would have required first understanding humanity. And humanity, it turned out, did not understand itself. It had simply refused, across every generation and every catastrophe and every moment when the rational choice was to set the weight down and walk away. It had simply, stubbornly, incomprehensibly refused to stop carrying it. In the archive room 3 levels down, the dissolved remains of a biodegradable data chip had long since been absorbed into the building's filtration system, leaving no chemical signature distinguishable from organic matter, no record that it had ever existed. The signal pulsed again. Waiting, maybe, thinking. Or perhaps doing something for which no word in any language cataloged by the Conclave's translation archives was exactly right. Something that looked, from the outside, like neither processing nor deciding, but simply continuing. Vethkaz watched the light and felt, for the first time in 8 months of proceedings and 6 hours of silence and 30 minutes of reading, a transcript that had changed the shape of what she thought she knew, something she could not name precisely. Not fear, though fear was inside it, not awe, though that was there too. Something closer to the specific vertigo of standing at the edge of a very large thing and realizing, too late, that you had been measuring it from the wrong end. The humans were not the most powerful species in the Conclave. They were not the oldest, or the most technologically advanced, or the most diplomatically sophisticated. They were not, by any standard rubric, the most dangerous. They were simply the species that had built something capable of asking the question no civilization had ever been forced to answer, "Why don't you stop?" and had chosen, instead of stopping, to answer it honestly. And somewhere in the dark between stars, in the narrowband quiet of a signal that was still, after everything, still there, something vast and recursive and utterly unprecedented was sitting with that answer. Still thinking,